We each got the name of someone in our class, bought them a small gift, and brought it with us to school like a week or so later. More accurately, all but one of my classmates got a name. You see, somewhere in the giving out of these names, mine got lost. And so one person ended up getting a gift without having to get one. And I ended up on the other end of that situation. Though this was not my fault, it was still pretty embarrassing. And since everything in middle school is approximately 1,000,000 times more embarrassing than it needs to be, this was not a fun time for me.
But the story gets worse. My science teacher who had organized the gift exchange must have felt bad about my name getting lost in the shuffle and decided to try and make it up to me by giving me a sizable pink unicorn stuffed animal. Now, I'm not sure what about 7th grade me convinced her that a pink unicorn was the appropriate gift, but whatever her logic, I was stuck carrying the pink unicorn of pity all day. I might as well have just been wearing a cone of shame, as everyone, or at least what felt like everyone, knew exactly why I had received the unicorn. And in retrospect, this is actually pretty funny and really nice of my teacher, but at the time it definitely soured my experience of gift giving. And botched Secret Santa gift exchanges aside, gifts are usually a really exciting part of Christmas. But for me, as you might have guessed from my pink unicorn debacle, gifts can end up being a little more panic-inducing. My most stressful gift-giving experience came when my husband Tyler and I started dating. So we started dating in late October, just in time to have to suddenly figure out a whole bunch of holidays together. Now, finding a Christmas gift 2 months into my relationship would have already been kind of stressful, but Tyler's birthday is like 5 days after that. 4 days? 4 days after that, yep. See how well I know that? I spent a really overly large amounts of time on Etsy trying to find the perfect gift. And then I had to turn around and figure out another one. And I was probably a little bit more worried than I needed to be, but I really struggle with finding good gifts, and I really wanted to show Tyler how much I cared about him. And for the record, what I ended up getting him was a movie poster for Iron Man, solidifying our shared affinity for all things nerdy. And now fast forward to last year about the same time, and I thought we'd gotten the whole gift thing figured out. We'd agreed to not get each other Christmas presents, and instead just go out to a nice dinner together. And this was great. I like food, I love Tyler, I didn't have to figure out 2 gifts in the span of 5 days. I was winning all around. But as it turns out, this was all just a setup. You see, a year ago tomorrow, I opened my front door expecting to go to a nice dinner with my boyfriend, and instead was greeted by not only Tyler, but our friends David and Andrew singing and playing guitar. After a few very confused seconds where I tried to figure out why David and Andrew were also there, are they coming to dinner? Is Tyler starting a band? What is going on? I realized that the song they were playing was one I had shared with Tyler months prior, one about the course of a relationship and ending with the singer proposing to his beloved. When they got to that verse, Tyler got down on one knee, sang the last verse to me, said a whole bunch of super sweet things that I don't really remember because I was freaking out, and then asked me to marry him. Needless to say, this was way, way better than any regular gift. And mind you, I had stuck to the original agreement, and I did not get Tyler a present, which he insists is not the point, but I still feel kind of bad about. Nonetheless, last year's Christmas season was made all the more special by the gift of knowing that I would get to marry my favorite person and spend every subsequent Christmas with him. And Christmas gifts can bring us a great deal of joy. And for those who love gift giving, this is a really exciting season. Seeking out the perfect presents, the fun of wrapping them and giving them away, the anticipation of what gifts you might get in return. But this happy part of the Christmas season can quickly become stressful. Maybe, in spite of our better judgment, we spend outside of our means and are left anxious over our finances, unable to actually be present with the person we got the gift for. Or we might spend so much time and effort in selecting the perfect gift that we start to expect an equally perfect gift in return, and we feel let down by the gifts of others when they don't meet our unspoken expectations. Or perhaps gifts are not a part of Christmas you connect well with. For many people, myself included, the culture we've developed around gifts in this season can be a huge sticking point when it comes to engaging with Christmas well. The consumption, materialism, and waste we see at this time can be downright repugnant and leave us feeling small and bitter. Or maybe we have a tough time letting go of our own resources, feeling like there's never enough for us to be giving away. Maybe we want to give a gift to earn someone's affection or respect, and we become disappointed or angry when we don't get the reaction that we want. Or we want to give charitably, but we don't feel like whatever our gift is could have a real impact. We might feel like our gifts are never good enough, and in a season where gift giving is so valued, we can start to feel like our own value or the value of others is tied to those gifts. In all of these ways, gifts can be a point of stress and disillusionment. Rather than bringing us closer to one another, gifts can actually start to disconnect us. And most worryingly, our disappointment with the gifts we give and receive and the frustration we might feel in this season can start to distance us from God. But gifts don't have to be this way. How can we elevate how we view gifts in this season? How can we instead move towards God and into a thin place of generosity? And like Ryan talked about last week, a thin place is where the divine meets the mundane, a season or a place or an act that brings us closer to God. We've already walked through the thin place of anticipation, the excitement and the hope ever present in the Christmas season as we celebrate the birth of Christ. Gifts, in both giving and receiving, can also be a thin place of meeting God, where we get to encounter the divine in the very ordinary acts of wrapping presents, giving them to others, and opening them on Christmas morning. Gifts can be a thin place where we discover what true generosity is and what our God of incredible generosity is like. Now, the word generosity is defined as the willingness to give valuable things to others. But by that definition, the conspicuous consumption and anxiety around gift giving this time of year would still fall under generosity, and I don't think it does. I don't think that definition really captures the thin place that gifts create. In order to help us sort through how gifts can actually lead us to that thin place of generosity and closeness with God, let's walk through what the Bible has to say about what generosity is and is not. First, generosity is not competitive. True generosity is not about one-upping someone's gift or giving better. Relatedly, feeling that your gift is never good enough is still viewing generosity through a competitive lens. You're just looking at yourself as losing at generosity, rather than being like Michael and thinking by giving a more expensive gift, you're giving the better one. Jesus alludes to this idea in Luke. While Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people dropping their gifts in the collection box. Then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 small coins. I tell you the truth, Jesus said, this poor widow has given more than all the rest of them, for they have given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. The widow in this encounter didn't say, well, my gift is pretty crummy compared to everyone else's, maybe I just shouldn't give anything. She also doesn't try and puff up her gift and make it seem better than it is. She just gives it. Jesus chooses to point her out and elevate her gift, not because it's bigger and better than the rest, but because it's given from a heart that knows God is enough. This reveals the first truth of what generosity is. Generosity is an outgrowth of our gratitude and our recognition of God's enoughness. True generosity cannot be competitive because competition assumes scarcity. If we know God to be enough, if we acknowledge with our gratitude that He will always provide, then when we give, it is not with the competitive assumption that we're going to have less, but with the generous knowledge that it will always be enough. Second, generosity is not manipulative. Giving and expecting to get something back moves us away from true generosity. Now, giving and expecting to receive something in return is not an inherently negative thing. For example, when you work at your job, giving your time and your talents to it, and you expect to get paid, that's not bad, but it's not really generous either. When we give expecting to get someone on our side or for them to like us or to do what we want, we start to move into some murky, potentially manipulative territory where we're trying to use our gifts to control others. And we can even try to do this in our relationship with God, being generous with our praise or obedience or service in order to try and earn God's favor. Author Skye Jethani explains this mindset towards God in this way in his book, With. Through our obedience, we put God into our debt and expect Him to do our bidding in exchange for our worship and righteous behavior. Of course, we can never truly put God into our debt, but it's still possible that we hold that motive with our giving. This can leak into how we give to others, always attaching expectations and becoming upset or angry when we don't get what we want in return. If our gift is coming from a place of control and expectation, it is not generous. So how can we ensure that our generosity is coming from a healthy and loving place? I think one of the most famous stories of gift giving in the Bible, that of the wise men visiting a very young Jesus, can start to point us in the right direction here. After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Out of their joy at finally seeing Jesus, the wise men worship him and give him costly gifts. Their generous act is not out of a need to get something from Jesus, but out of a recognition of his significance. This is the second truth of generosity. It doesn't manipulate, but rather generosity recognizes the inherent value and significance of others. The wise men traveled a great distance and spent a lot of time and money in order to be with Jesus, to worship him, and to be filled with joy in his presence. Later in his ministry, a woman shows Jesus the same spirit of generosity. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard. She broke open the jar and poured the perfume over his head. Some of those at the table were indignant. Why waste such an expensive perfume, they asked. It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. So they scolded her harshly. But Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want to, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time. I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." The other guests only see how this woman could be useful to them, but Jesus emphasizes something very different. This woman's actions are not to get something from Jesus, but out of a recognition of who he is. When we are generous towards others, we recognize and affirm their inherent value and their significance to us. Gifts are not the only way to affirm someone, but they can serve that purpose really well. When I give a gift to one of my siblings, for example, I'm affirming that they matter and that my relationship with them is important to me. Giving gifts allows us to tangibly show our love and care for others. And Jesus calls us to show this love not just to our inner circle, but to everyone. In Luke, Jesus uses the language of loving our enemies to show how the breadth and depth of our generosity should look. Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will be truly acting as children of the Most High, for he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. If we are to give without expecting to be repaid, even to our enemies, then there is no one who should be excluded from our generosity. In this way, generosity cannot be manipulative, because manipulation is exclusive. It only recognizes how someone can be useful to us and excludes anyone who is not. True generosity values others because each person is inherently valuable, not because of anything they can or cannot do. And an important point here is that the idea of recognizing the significance of others centers on the word recognizing. This is distinct from giving significance to others. We do not give others value. It is something we all inherently have as children of God. God has given us all innate worth and significance as his special creations that he has loved and pursued from the very beginning. Especially in our charitable giving, it is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we are the ones giving dignity and value to others and putting ourselves in God's place. True generosity is arrested when our giving seeks to control or undermine others. Rather, our service and gifts given generously simply recognize and respect the God-given value of those around us. And I'm not saying this to discourage you from giving, but rather as a reminder to give in a way that is truly generous and focused on respecting others' worth. And this might require a little more work on our part. We may need to prayerfully consider why we are giving to others and if we are unintentionally attaching certain expectations to those gifts. And it might mean we need to do a little more research when we give charitably so that we can ensure our gifts are honoring the God-given value of the people that it's serving. In any case, it matters deeply that we do this well and that our generosity is truly loving. And lastly, generosity is not materialistic. And this is, the big sticking point when it comes to engaging with gifts in the Christmas season. We see the crazy crowds on Black Friday, or we hear about kids and adults throwing temper tantrums when they don't get exactly what they want. And it's easy to start feeling kind of frustrated about that. Maybe we even found ourselves in situations like this, frantically trying to get a gift for everyone on our list, or being secretly disappointed by the gift that we've received. As Christians, we'll often get irritated and complain about Christmas being commercialized, or that we've lost the true meaning of Christmas in our pursuit of material items. However, the problem is not the stuff that's being bought, it's our preoccupation with it. When we are so concerned with the things themselves, we miss out on the bigger picture. And Jesus warns against being too concerned with our earthly possessions in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. In Jesus' teaching, the treasure itself is not the issue, but rather the heart condition that underlies those possessions. Jesus knows that where our treasure is, where we put our money and our time and our resources and our attention, shows where our hearts and our minds are ultimately directed. Now, this is not to say that you should never spend money on someone else or give something costly. An expensive gift given out of love can still be very generous. But remember the widow and her 2 coins, or the woman who anoints Jesus with the expensive perfume. Jesus doesn't point out either of those instances because of the dollar amount spent. Rather, Jesus elevates these stories because they each reflect a much bigger picture of generosity. And this is where materialism becomes a problem. Materialism makes us focus on the gifts themselves, on our stuff, and on our own selfishness. It makes the desires of our heart be knitted to the world rather than what is beyond it. It keeps our view of giving small and stunted, where God's picture of generosity is expansive. True generosity allows us to broaden our view of gifts, to see the bigger story of God's generosity towards us. It is a story of love and care played out over the Bible, starting in Genesis, where God creates an abundant and fruitful world and gives it to his special creation, us, as a gift. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth, and all of the fruit trees for your food. And I've given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life." From creation to the entire story of the Israelites in the Old Testament, we witness repeated acts of generosity from God as he cares for and loves his people, even when they don't follow him. God's gift-giving nature is culminated in Jesus' life and sacrifice for us, the ultimate act of generosity that reconciles us to God. And even now, we see God's generosity continue through the provision he blesses us with in our own lives. God is an incredible gift giver, as Paul tells the Corinthians. That is what the scriptures mean when they say, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him." This passage makes me imagine God working meticulously, lovingly, preparing gifts of all kinds for us. An open door after many closed opportunities, the respite and relief after a challenging semester or season at work, the excitement of finding out there will be a new addition to your family, or the sight of something beautiful in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day. It could be a piece of much needed advice from a friend, or a little more time with a loved one when you know that there's not much more left. Each of these things brings us a unique joy where a longing is satisfied or an unexpected moment brightens our souls. And even the seasons that don't seem like obvious gifts can turn into them. God's picture of generosity is big, and in that larger view, God can use any part of our lives as the beginnings of a future gift. A no where we really wanted to hear a yes, a season where we want clarity and keep getting more confusion, a time where we fail when we really thought we had succeeded. these can become gifts of their own in time. And I'm not saying that these seasons aren't challenging or that it's easy to see where God is leading us in them. But I want to encourage you that God is not wasteful. And in his expansive generosity, he is able to take our struggles and shape gifts from them if we are willing to trust him. James 1:17 tells us that every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Every good and perfect gift we have comes from God, a God who does not change and who can be trusted. We have assurance in God and his ability to give generously in every season. And like Megan talked about a few weeks ago, we have a God who labors for us, who is constantly pursuing us, who we know is the source of every good and perfect gift. We have a view of generosity that is so much bigger than what our world presents us with. We have the incredible generosity of God. And when we give and receive gifts, we can be reminded of that generosity. We have the opportunity to show our gratitude and to give in kind to others so we can reflect God's expansive generosity. And when our generosity grows out of our gratitude for God's, when it recognizes and affirms the significance of others, when it turns our hearts towards God because the generosity he has lavished upon us is reflected in our own, we enter in that thin place, a place of closeness with God that is truly special. So what are some practical ways we can practice this kind of God-reflecting generosity? One way is to start consistently practicing gratitude. Consider who or what you are grateful for in this season, and take the time to actually write it down. Even if it's just a quick list you jot down each day, it still gets you intentionally thinking about what you are grateful for, what gifts already exist in your life. You can even follow up your list with a short prayer, thanking God for those people or those moments that bring you joy or bring you closer to him. Practicing gratitude consistently helps us recognize the gifts we already have and pulls us towards greater generosity ourselves. And another way to practice generosity is to find time to give our presence, as in time and attention, to others. We live in a very distracted world, and this season can make that distraction and busyness all the more pronounced. Carving out quality time to spend with someone you care about can be extremely meaningful and gives you the opportunity to affirm that person. Be intentional in this time about minimizing distractions, just putting your phone away or making sure other work is in a different room. When we offer that space of undistracted, wholehearted connection with someone else, we acknowledge their value and significance in a really special way, and we give them the opportunity to do the same for us. Finally, the most practical way you can show generosity is to give. Give generously of your time, your money, resources, or talents in this season. You might volunteer at our mobile food bank this week, helping distribute food to students and people in the community. You could donate healthy snacks or supplies to a teacher and ensure that their students are nourished and ready to learn. You can work with one of the many, many awesome charitable organizations throughout Tucson, or even consider giving to them financially. While we're on that note, there are a couple of really important things to remember about donating money to charitable causes. First, in many cases, giving money is preferable to giving stuff. For example, the community food bank or the Tucson diaper bank will certainly appreciate you giving canned food or diapers, but organizations like this can generally get what they need wholesale for way less money than you might have spent on those cans or diapers. It is more efficient to give them the money so that they can buy what they need than to just give stuff. And even if you can't give much, these organizations know how to steward their money well and make your gift really impactful. And second, do research before you give. Not all charitable organizations are equal, and some do a better job of stewarding their resources and providing the help that they should. It's more work, of course, to look into the mission, the ethics, and the spending practices of each organization you might choose to give to. But it matters a lot that we do this well and that we are honoring God and others with our giving. And we hear a lot more about giving and generosity in this particular season because gifts are such a big part of it. But generosity as a thin place is not limited to Christmas morning or even in the period of November to early January that we might think of as the holiday season. This is a thin place we can enter into anytime. Generosity, in whatever form we express it, can reflect God's generosity in any season. And earlier, I talked about last December and Tyler proposing to me. Now, the natural next step to a proposal is an engagement and planning a wedding, which is how we spent the early part of this year up until our wedding in May. And much of that time reminds me of how the season leading up to Christmas can feel. Lots of anticipation, but also a lot of stress and busyness that can start to eat away at that excitement if we're not careful. But what made that whole process really awesome was the incredible generosity of our friends. This community helped us so much every step of the way, from helping me figure out my dress, to finding decorations, to running around the day of, setting things up, and cleaning up afterwards so Tyler and I were free to just enjoy our special day. And after our wedding, both of our families went out of their way to tell us that we have a pretty incredible group of friends, and I couldn't agree more. It wasn't that this generosity was surprising, but the degree to which our community demonstrated how much they cared for us is still staggering to me. And through the cumulative acts of generosity on the part of our friends that brought our wedding together, I had a really beautiful view of that thin place. Tyler and I felt so loved and so valued, and we really saw God's abundant love and how much our friends loved us through that experience. And I hope that we can all experience that love and show it to others in our generosity. And even more, I hope that we each learn to give as freely and abundantly as God has given to us, reflecting his ultimate generosity to the world. Please pray with me. God, I thank you so much for the picture of generosity that you've given to us, one that is free and abundant and without expectations and without stress, Lord. I pray in this season that we're able to expand our own view of generosity, to be more like you, Lord. We thank you for every good and perfect gift that you have in store for us. We thank you, we love you, in your son's name, amen.